This episode is brought to you by TaxAct. Don't do your taxes alone. Join TaxAct's National Admin Night. Admin nights are social gatherings for getting through your to-do list. So get ready for a night of fun, finding deductions, and filing taxes with TaxAct, where you can file your federal and state return for just $49 through April 8. Let's get together and get them over with. Visit taxact.com/admin-night for details.
Welcome to The Secret Life of Cookies, where we try to solve the world's problems through the miracle of carbohydrates, one recipe at a time, with host Marissa Rothkopf and her dog, Bosco.
Hello, and welcome to the Secret Life of Cookies podcast. My guest today is the wonderful Joe Cirincione, the only human I ever want to talk to get the truth about nuclear war, for his blend of candor and kindliness. If you've been concerned about the recent threats by Putin of nuclear attack, this is a must-listen episode. Before we get to the show, the gods of algorithm and I would appreciate it if you could leave a hopefully nice review of the podcast on the Apple Podcast site. I would appreciate it very much, extremely so much. Yes, indeed, very much. Well, welcome to the Secret Life of Cookies. My guest this morning is Joe Cirincione, whose name I love to pronounce, national security analyst, author of books such as Nuclear Nightmares, Securing the World Before It's Too Late, and Deadly Arsenals, Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Threats. Good morning.
They're romance novels. I thought it was...
You should see the covers of these books, man.
The bodice rippers. It's just
totally men with their chests blazoned with American flags across the rippling abs. And those are just the ones that Putin has written. The pitch for this podcast, when I'm like off going, please come on my podcast, is something like, we talk, we're in the kitchen. It's where we bake and talk, and in that relaxed setting, discuss the world events. And today I can say, and in that relaxed setting, we discuss the possibility of nuclear war. Good morning.
Make some comfort food.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to do this morning. We're making an old favorite, but to me it's new. And it is literally, if you can fall asleep on this, there's no harm to your face. The most comforting way to eat oatmeal I've found. And it is baked oatmeal. And it means that you can have oatmeal all week and not have to get up every morning and stir or even eat instant. And it uses maple syrup. It doesn't use refined sugar and is full of all sorts of delicious, nutritious things.
I'm really looking forward to this. This is, I'm making this for my grandkids. I'm going to bring it over to them this morning. I'm taking care of them this morning, so I'm going to bring it up. And what I like about this recipe is it ends up with breakfast squares. And so I can cut them up and I can still have some tomorrow morning. It's wonderful.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And it's nice cold or reheated. Thanks for joining us. No, it's true. I think this thing is great. And today I'm making a different version than the one yesterday. Yesterday when it was very kind of felt like an apple pie. And this one today is going to involve chocolate chips, just because I don't have to explain any more than that. Or maybe it's because we're talking about nuclear war. But you seem to have kept yourself together and you talk about it all the time. We wake up to news this morning of Ukraine being bombed around the country at rush hour. Retaliation, say the Russians, for the terrorist actions of blowing up the bridge. And I read that, I guess, one of Putin's cronies said, well, it's just like you would do in your countries. And the petulant tone of the Russians really doesn't actually make me think of warlike, but that's me. What do you make of the news this morning? I'm going to start measuring things, by the way, like all the things that are going into it.
Okay. I've got most of my stuff pre-measured, so I'm waiting for the instructions to combine. So
just whatever you can. This is a great recipe of just pouring it all into the container, into the bowl on top of melted butter. So you've already done that. And
yes.
Just going for it. So
okay.
Go at your own
Okay.
pace.
Okay, I will. Thank you. Okay, that's great to know. Well, the news today is grim for Ukraine in retaliation for the strike on the bridge that connects Russia to Crimea, which was a tactical operation with incredible strategic importance for Ukrainians. It was a major military strike on their part. Putin is doing terror strikes on civilian targets in Kyiv and about 10 other cities across Ukraine. He's trying to take out some of the infrastructure, the heating facilities, the electric facilities, trying to increase the pain that Ukraine will feel over the winter as that comes on in the next couple of months. In some ways, it's not just a terrorist attack. This is all war crimes. It is illegal to deliberately target civilians or civilians' infrastructure. Goes back almost 100 years in war crimes. People do it. We've done it. That's why they can throw that back in our face, but it's still a war crime. In this case, it's about, as of this morning, there are about 17, 20 people reported killed in the Ukrainian attacks. In some ways, it's a sign of his weakness, that this is all he's got. He's got the long-range missiles that can reach this. So he's launching them from Russian territory all the way across Ukraine, hundreds of kilometers. He has those long-range systems. The Ukrainians don't. They want them from us. We've resisted giving them these missiles that can travel 200 miles or more. But it's a sign of how much trouble he's in, that he doesn't really have the military targets to hit. The Ukrainians have done a masterful job of deploying their forces, moving them carefully, methodically to encircle the Russians. They've been advancing for the last month since they started their northern offensive in the city of and province of Kharkiv. And they've been making steady progress, and Putin is in trouble. So that's part of what's going on here. He is losing this war. And that strike on the bridge in Crimea was a personal blow to him. This was one of his personal multi-billion-dollar projects. He drove the first truck across this bridge in 2018 when he opened it up. It was a sign that Crimea was permanently going to be part of Russia. And the Ukrainians are saying, no, not so fast. We want to liberate Crimea. This is on the table. We are going to take back all the territory. And so far, it looks like they might be able to do this. So it's a dramatic stage in this war that's been going on for just about 8 months now, coming up to the 8-month anniversary.
Right. Putin has done a lot of, we don't call it saber rattling anymore. He's doing like nuke rattling, right? And
yes,
I know you have been talking to people like Chris Hayes and others about what's been going, like what the threat means. And I've been trying to read as much as I can about it. And Putin is right that he scares people with nuclear weapons, right?
Yes.
It is a terror tactic, but I think the phrase you use is, but he might cross that big red line.
Yeah. That's right. So you got to take this on multiple levels. Some of the discussions over the weekend that I've been having with various news anchors have been very, very helpful to me in my thinking, and I hope to theirs, is that this is primarily a terror tactic. He's primarily doing this to try to deter the West from giving Ukraine the arms it needs. And Joe Biden is paying attention to this. The Biden administration has been very careful. They've been aiding Ukraine substantially, but trying not to do that in ways that would provoke Putin even more. So, for example, not giving them the long-range weapons that we talked about, and sort of metering the aid that we give them, not having direct U.S. involvement in the war, no NATO ground troops, for example, things that would escalate this even further. So Putin is trying to stay the hand, but it's also trying to split Europe, trying to convince Europe that they should back off, play into sentiments in the United States that span the spectrum from the pro-Putin faction in the Republican Party that, like Ted Cruz, admires the Russian military as being more masculine than the supposedly feminine American military.
Can we pause on that for a moment?
Sure.
Because it's early in the morning and I'm feeling a bit, itchy, flippant. But how do you call yourself a United States senator and have grown up? I mean, it's got to be about my age. And say something about the Russian military being more masculine or implying that they're more masculine than our own military.
Yeah.
That's why you show honor to him. This man meets his constituents who are in the army, and it makes it sound as if he has absolutely no regard for our country. I know he's from Canada, but still.
Well, this is where the two sort of connect. There's a lot of people in the far right in this country that are admirers of fascism. I consider Putin a fascist leader. He has all the earmarks of a fascist leader. He's created a one-man cult, an authoritarian regime, control of the media, etc. Okay, and you have people here in the United States who admire that, including Donald Trump. Let's start with the top man. Yeah. And they admire these authoritarian figures, Viktor Orban in Hungary, Bolsonaro in Brazil, etc. The new leader of Italy. You know, it doesn't have to be a man, but they consider this is what they're looking for: strength. You know, and these classic fascist tendencies. And that's part of what's going on here. And they think that Putin's a better leader than Joe Biden, for example, which is, you know, unbelievable. Yes, but that's where we are in this country, where you have an objectively pro-fascist wing of the Republican Party favoring this. Yeah.
I guess there's another reason we should all be teaching more history in this country, so people understand what a fascist means. I did ask my students.
Watch Ken Burns. Watch the Ken Burns show on the Holocaust, right? And you see how this happened here before that you maybe didn't quite get when you were studying this stuff in school.
It's words and paragraphs. You know, I had to explain to my students like what a fascist is. Although their first answer when I said, "What do you think a fascist is?" and they're like, "Is that like, are they conservatives?"
Well,
I had to explain what it meant. Yes. Unfortunately, in this country, yes, it's very conservative. But they're running.
So that's what Putin. So back to Putin just for a second. So that's right. That's what he's doing. He's also playing into the peace movement here. I've come from the anti-war movement. I've been an anti-imperialist, arms control, disarmament advocate. So I understand why people feel that war is not the answer, and they see this war. Some sections of the peace movement, the anti-war movement, see this war in Ukraine as a continuation of the last 20 years of failed, unnecessary wars that the U.S. has waged. And they blame NATO policy. They blame U.S. policy, the expansion of NATO, for provoking Putin. Some of my colleagues, from the realist school of international analysis, like Stephen Walt, John Mearsheimer, talk about this as a preventive war. So Putin is in some way being cast as a victim, and he's only doing, and that resonates in the peace movement. So you come out with letters demanding that Biden do more on diplomacy, but not like Putin do more on diplomacy, Biden do more in diplomacy. So you see people lining up objectively to sort of decrease aid for Ukraine, make a deal over the heads of the Ukrainian people, make a deal with Putin, recognize the territory that he's occupied now as being part of Russia. And so Putin's aiming at that with these nuclear strikes to stimulate those sentiments in America, in the United States. But it's not just that, because he also means it. He's also softening up world opinion to allow him to cross that nuclear line, because he thinks he might have to do that to prevent Russia losing this war. And he might have to, that's on the table, that he thinks that he has an advantage that he can get by using a nuclear weapon to prevent a conventional defeat.
I would argue that it isn't an advantage, but I'm just, in New Jersey,
and you'd be right.
Oatmeal squares. But that from an economic point of view, China's not going to want to have to deal with them, and Russia needs China more than China needs Russia, right? And we want China to be, we see them as someone that we're going to need to stay friendly with. So why does he see a nuclear attack as something that people would gather around him and support? Who would, aside from his friend in Belarus?
Well, that's a very good point. This is part of, first of all, he has the means to do this. He has about 6,000 nuclear weapons. We failed to eliminate these weapons after the end of the Cold War. So we left him with an arsenal of 6,000 weapons. About 2,000 of these are weapons that he can put on shorter range systems like the Iskander cruise missiles that he's using in Ukraine, probably today. 2, he's got the method. There's a theory in Russian military doctrine. It's called escalate to de-escalate, which says that you can use nuclear weapons first to turn the tide of battle in a conventional war. And 3, he's got the motive. So he's losing. The Russian army looks very fragile at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got to do something, or he not only is he going to lose the war, but he might lose power. So this is close to an existential crisis for him. So he thinks that this can demonstrate strength. But I think, like you, that if you do this, if you cross this line, he's going to be diplomatically isolated. China and India are going to head for the doors. Right. You think that the economic sanctions are tough right now? Where do you see a complete economic embargo, cut off from the international financial system, purchase of oil and gas from Russia banned, things like that? And there are many, many options that we have to respond to a nuclear strike, short of using nuclear weapons ourselves. I mean,
okay. So what do we do?
Biden is, so you got all these economic and diplomatic options, depending on what kind of use you have, how serious this strike is, how many casualties there are. Because it could be a relatively low yield weapon that's used that kills hundreds, perhaps, or thousands of people. And so you can sort of calibrate your response that goes from the ones I just mentioned all the way up to cyber options. We have very serious cyber weapons that could turn Moscow dark, for example. And then you'd cross the line, you'd over to direct NATO US conventional military involvement. We spent decades developing highly precise conventional weapons that could probably devastate the Russian army in Ukraine in a matter of days. We could decide to do that. And that's short of strikes on Russia. And that's short of using a tactical nuclear weapon. Because one of the things that Joe Biden said the other day, Thursday night when he spoke, was not just that he thought we were getting closer to Armageddon than any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, but that there's no safe way to use a tactical nuclear weapon, a low-yield battlefield weapon, without heading down the road towards Armageddon. And he's right about that. So you want to avoid crossing that line yourself, even if your opponent has already done it, because you're trying to control the escalation, trying to prevent it from getting out of control. And that gets very hard to do once you respond with a nuclear weapon.
I'll ask the question as an innocent. So why does it get harder to do?
Well, because you don't get, there's something called the fallacy of the last move. You think you get the last move. Putin thinks if he uses a nuclear weapon, that's it. The other side will stand down. We might think, okay, we're going to use 2 nuclear weapons and we're going to force him to stand down. Well, the other side always gets a move. And so it could rapidly spiral out of control. And we haven't seen a nuclear weapon used in combat in 77 years. Most people have never seen a nuclear explosion. The last above ground nuclear explosion was a test conducted by China in 1980. So you use one of these things, you're going to stop the world. Everybody's going to stop, right? But what happens next is in war games, when you start a nuclear exchange, each move is fraught with escalatory risks, and it's very difficult to prevent it from spiraling all the way up. So that's what President Biden is wrestling with now, and the NATO alliance. And what you come up with is that the best answer to this, the best response, is to prevent him from doing it in the first place. And that's why you see talk about this and trying to build up a global opposition to that. The US is talking to China, talking to India, trying to convince them to talk to Putin. So you're trying to use all the levers you can to deter Putin from crossing that line, which is why I think in the end, this is not probable. This is not likely. This is not something that's imminent, but it is possible. And it is on the table in a way that it hasn't been for 60 years. This is October. This is the 60th anniversary of those 13 days in 1962, October, where we came very close to a global nuclear exchange. It's different. We're not talking about hundreds of weapons flying. We're talking about a battlefield use, 1 or 2 that could spiral up. It's different, but it's still the closest we've come to the intentional use in many decades.
Mi familia has more fun at Walt Disney World. Like me papa, he's super serious. But since he met Goofy, he's been laughing all day. Or my sister. I never thought she'd try out the fast rides, but Space Mountain was her favorite. And me, I didn't think anything could feel so special.
The memories made at Walt Disney World Resort. That's pura magia.
Now let's talk about zest briefly before I ask you a question. Yes.
So I've got my lemon. I have what I think is a zester. Here,
sort of. Yeah, but I think it's too much. You need something a little finer, like a rasp.
Oh, like that. Oh, yeah, I got one of those.
The greatest kitchen tool ever made.
Oh, great. That's what I need. Of course.
Wait, there's the tactical nuclear weapon I found under my sink.
There's a weapon for every mission. Okay.
Exactly.
And that's
next
no
to the
wonder
tactical...
I'm so glad I asked. And
let me ask you a question, just because it sort of, I guess, gobsmacked me. With all due respect to former Defense Secretary William Perry, he said that if a tactical nuclear weapon was used on Ukraine, I think there would be an international uproar, but I don't think it would last long. It might blow over in a week or two. Now, aside from the fact that he used the phrase blow over, which is really unfortunate when you're talking about tactical nuclear weapons, as anybody who understands how nuclear explosions work, how could it be true? It goes against everything you're saying, everything my mind believes. Like, if one tactical nuclear strike does then raise the stakes, it could go, obviously we try and keep it from escalating further. It still raises the level of of it happening. How can you say this could blow over in a couple of weeks?
I really have to talk to him about this, because I saw that same quote and I understand what he's saying. And this is part of what Putin's trying to do. My friend Tom Nichols wrote a column in the Atlantic last week talking about Putin's strategy is to get people used to the idea. It's kind of like Trump talking about the elections are rigged. And he talks about it so much that when he finally comes out and refuses to recognize the result of the election, you sort of set it up. You sort of expect this. Oh, yes, the elections were rigged. So Putin's trying to do that on nuclear weapons. I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it. This is a threat. This is you're threatening me. Don't push me too far. So when he does use it, you sort of feel that this is in the realm of acceptability. And right. So that's what he's trying to do. I have to disagree with Secretary Perry on this. I don't think it'll blow over. I don't think you blow over something like this in a week or two. But the world's a complicated place. There's lots of other issues going on. Most people won't feel the explosion. If he were to hit Kherson, for example, in southern Ukraine, you wouldn't feel it in Kyiv. It wouldn't be like Warsaw would have radiation clouds over it. It'd be a local event. It'd be like Hiroshima. That's the size of the bomb we're talking, which is small by contemporary standards, but of course devastating for the people that are hit.
You just said it would be like Hiroshima, like in its size, in its tactical quality, or
when you talk about tactical nuclear weapons, you have a range that you can use, and like for example, the Iskander missile has a nuclear warhead we've seen it in conventional use, but it has a nuclear warhead that can be fitted that ranges from about 10 kilotons, which is 2/3 the size of the Hiroshima bomb. Hiroshima was 15 kilotons, 15,000 tons of TNT. And it goes all the way up to 100. So 5-6 times the size of the Hiroshima bomb. And you can dial it as to what kind of blast you want. And the thinking is generally that if you're going to do this as a first time, as a kind of a shock to try to turn the tide of battle, you'd keep it relatively small to try to get the effect you want without provoking the other side's nuclear response. So you might see something on the Hiroshima level. Hiroshima was a very dense city, so about 100,000 people died. If it was used in a battlefield condition, you might see just hundreds or thousands of people dead. Still an enormous catastrophe, still terrible, still shocking. But that's the kind of thing that Bill Perry's talking about. If it was sort of that kind of event, you might see people after a week, move on to it. I think he's wrong, but I understand why he's saying it.
But the repercussions that would come from that, like we said, would be, there'd be other repercussions that would happen
yes.
right now so that everyone can sleep at night. I mean, we have to understand. I think the thing that those of us who get nervous about this kind of things and are not like,
well, that's so you're paying attention. You should be nervous about this kind of thing. That's an accurate reaction to what's going on.
You should see how many chocolate chips I have poured into this oatmeal mixture. What is going on behind the scenes that we don't know about? Obviously, not the deeply secret stuff, but what is going on? Like when we have obviously been doing war games forever in this country, what kind of discussions are going on with NATO? How does NATO prepare for something like this?
Yeah,
I think we need, when we wake up at 3:00 in the morning, we have to have this feeling that there are lots of people awake and worrying about this who actually know what to do with it themselves. So what's happening?
Yes, well, several things. The military and the intelligence services and the White House game this out all the time. I mean, this is a regular, they even exercise it in various exercises. So, and they've been doing it intensely since the war began. All these things we're talking about in 30 other variations of them, and preparing thick scenario books and thick response books, and then talking to the NATO allies about this. Because it's not at all clear that if Putin did a strike like this, that you'd get a unified NATO response. There would be countries that object to responding. You might get Hungary objecting, Italy objecting, to even, other countries nervous about bringing the war into Europe. So you got to work that. So that's number one that's going on that you're working at. Number two, there's reports of intense discussions between the US and China and India, as we mentioned, try to convince them, find the people that might have some influence over Putin. Number three, I would be very surprised if there were not private discussions going on between US military or US intelligence and Russian political leaders, Russian military leaders directly, trying to convince them to break with Putin over this, not do this kind of, not cross this line, and remind them that one, we know who they are, we know where they live, we have their cell phone numbers, which means we have their location, and that there's life after Putin, and there's a life for them after Putin. So you're trying to do all those kinds of things, and of course, then prepare in detail what steps you would take if he does this, and it, event A. Well, then we're going to do 1, 2, 3, and 4, and prepare the ground for 4, 5, and 6. So this is not going to be unexpected. And that's why you see Biden talking about it. I mean, some people have criticized him for even mentioning this, but I think this is exactly what you have to do. You have to call this out. You have to prepare your responses in advance and try to show Putin that this would not win the war for him. This would not change anything for him. It would make it worse. This is a loser move, and you're preparing some kind of off-ramp for him, as odious as that is. As much as you see people talking about he should be brought to trial, he should spend his life in prison, we should take him out. Well, if you're going to have some kind of negotiated solution to this, he's got to have an off-ramp, something that allows him to maintain power, even if that's a billionaire's retirement in Sochi, that allows him to keep living and pull back from this war. I think that is an equally probable outcome to going all the way. In fact, I think it's more probable. I think that at some point he is going to back down because he just... Well,
that's my question. Yeah. You're just going to say he's going to back down. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but he's going to back down. That's my question. He's got a losing hand. But how do you back down in a manly way? If you're him, who's all about show.
Timothy Snyder has a wonderful, very long article. I know, Timothy, he's been talking about fascism for many, many years now, warning us about this for many years. And he has a wonderful article in Foreign Affairs in the last week where he talks about how Putin, because he controls this Russian media and dominates the space, he's been telling the Russian people lie after lie and asking them to believe contradictory things all the time. Right. So he's been lying about the Ukraine war, what he was going to do, how it was going to turn out. He adjusts that to say, well, we're no longer going to denazify Ukraine. Now we're just going to liberate the Donbass region, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's trying to get them to say, well, that's what the goal is now. Well, he could, with this kind of apparatus he has, convince people that it's a victory, that he's declaring an end to hostilities, and we're going to have a new referendum in the Donbass region, or whatever he wants. Another lie that he can tell people that can give him a face-saving way out. And frankly, at this point, the Russian people would be relieved to end this war. You know, there are many more Russians who have fled Ukraine in his mobilization than have actually been conscripted into the Russian army. There's 200,000 men that have fled into Kazakhstan in the last 2 weeks, all just that one country. So this is not going well for him. And at some point, it's like playing poker, where he keeps raising the bet. He's the one doing the escalation. Like today, he's raising the bet. At some point, you have to convince him that there is no raise that can win the hand for him, that he's the one who's got to back down. He's the one who's got to fold. And that's what's going to work out over the next few months, I think, much more rapidly than people thought.
And the Russian people, by and large, that we have the sense that that the majority of Russians are not into this. Do we have any sense of how they reacted to his threatening nuclear use?
Well, polls in Russia are very unreliable. You know, if you get called up on the phone, are you going to tell them the truth?
No.
Oh, he's doing a great job.
Yeah, exactly. And no, my son isn't hiding in the refrigerator.
But I think that the most telling aspect is what you've seen. I mean, there are some reports that 1 million men have left Russia. I mean, this is just, incredible. And it's coming home now. And he didn't want this to happen. He wanted to shield the Russian people from the consequences of war. I don't think he could. It's getting too real. There's still a lot of support. I mean, you saw the rally he had last week, that bizarre rally and that insane rant he gave about the West being led by a satanic cabal that were trying to invent new genders.
No, that happened in Michigan at the gubernatorial debate.
Yeah, it is.
That wasn't blur. They do blur, don't they? Carrie Lake.
By the way, what am I heating the oven up to? What's the temperature?
You're heating the oven to a very to 350 degrees.
That's
which I kept out of the recipe because I wanted to make it mysterious for everyone. I have to hold some power here, people. I have my own domain issues.
That's right. Don't push Marissa. Don't push her, man.
No.
She'll go all the way to 375.
Oh, yeah. And then you'll see what happens to your cookies. Then I'll show you.
That's the end of this free episode of The Secret Life of Cookies. If you want to hear the rest of their conversation about nuclear security, baked oatmeal, and what Joe thinks about North Korea, become a member of the DSR Network for just $5 a month. Join at thedsrnetwork.com/buy.
Thanks for listening. Please follow Joe Cirincione on Twitter at Cirincione, that's Cirincione, and please subscribe to my Substack at marissaroscoff.substack.com for this episode's recipe and many more recipes to boot. Thank you so much and have a good week.